The neon vacancy sign flickered like a dying firefly, casting an eerie red glow across the empty parking lot. I pulled in, the gravel crunching under my tires, and killed the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. I hadn't planned on stopping here. The Pinewood Motel wasn't even a blip on my radar when I started this cross-country drive. But after 12 hours behind the wheel and my eyelids growing heavier by the minute, I knew I had to find a place to crash for the night. As I stepped out of my car, the cool night air sent a shiver down my spine, or maybe it was the way the motel seemed to loom over me. Its weathered facade a patchwork of peeling paint and rust stains. I shouldered my overnight bag and made my way to the office, my footsteps echoing in the empty lot. A bell jingled as I pushed open the door, the sound jarringly cheerful in the oppressive silence. The office was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of stale cigarettes and pine-scented cleaner. Behind the counter stood a man who looked as worn and faded as the motel itself. "Evening," he drawled, his eyes never quite meeting mine. "Need a room?" I nodded, fumbling in my purse for my wallet. "Just for the night. I'll be heading out first thing in the morning." He grunted in response, sliding a registration card across the counter. As I filled it out, I could feel his gaze on me, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. When I looked up, he quickly averted his eyes, busying himself with something under the counter. "That'll be $45, he said, holding out a key attached to a faded plastic tag. "Room 17, end of the row." I handed over the cash, noticing how his fingers lingered a bit too long when they brushed against mine. "Thanks," I muttered, snatching the key and hurrying out the door. The night seemed to press in around me as I made my way down the row of rooms. Most were dark, but I could see the flicker of a TV behind the curtains of one or two. I found room 17 and fumbled with the key, my hands shaking slightly. The room was exactly what I expected. Dated furnishings, a faint musty smell, and a bed that had seen better days. But it was clean enough, and at this point I was too tired to care. I dropped my bag, locked the door, and slid the security chain into place. As I went through my nightly routine, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that too many hours on the road had left me jittery and on edge. But I still double-checked the lock before crawling into bed. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by a sound. For a moment I lay perfectly still, straining my ears in the darkness. There it was again, a soft scraping noise coming from the direction of the door. My heart began to race as I slowly sat up, my eyes fixed on the thin strip of light visible under the door. A shadow passed by, blocking the light for a moment. Someone was out there. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, my fingers closing around empty air. With a jolt of panic, I remembered I'd left it charging in the car. Stupid mistake. The scraping sound came again, more insistent this time. It sounded like someone was trying to pick the lock. I slid out of bed, my bare feet silent on the threadbare carpet, and crept towards the door. The security chain offered little comfort as I pressed my eye to the peephole. At first, I saw nothing but the dimly lit walkway. Then a figure moved into view, the man from the office. He was hunched over the doorknob, something small and metallic glinting in his hand. I stumbled back, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen in real life, only in movies and true crime shows. But the continued scraping at the lock told me this was all too real. My eyes darted around the room, looking for a weapon, an escape route, anything. The window. I rushed over, my hands shaking as I tried to unlatch it. It didn't budge. Of course it didn't. What kind of motel would have windows that actually opened? The scraping at the door stopped, replaced by a soft knock. "Miss," the man's voice called out, sickly sweet. "Sorry to disturb you, but there's a problem with your registration. Could you open up for a moment?" I pressed myself against the wall next to the window, my breath coming in short gasps. "I'm sleeping," I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can't it wait until morning?" "Afraid not," he replied, his tone hardening slightly. It'll only take a minute." I could hear the lie in his voice, could practically feel his impatience growing. My mind raced through scenarios, each one worse than the last. I needed help, but how? My phone was in the car, and I was trapped in this room like a rat in a cage. The knocking came again, louder this time. "Miss, I'm going to need you to open this door." I closed my eyes trying to think. What would the heroines in all those thriller novels do? They wouldn't just stand there waiting to be victimized. They'd fight back. My eyes snapped open, scanning the room with new purpose. The lamp on the bedside table caught my attention. It wasn't much, but it was heavy with a solid base. It would have to do. I unplugged the lamp and hefted it in my hands, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I moved to stand beside the door, the lamp raised and ready. "All right," I called out, trying to inject a note of sleepy confusion into my voice. "Just a second." I reached out with a trembling hand and slid back the security chain. Then, holding my breath, I turned the lock. The door burst open immediately, and the man lunged inside. I swung the lamp with all my might, connecting solidly with the side of his head. He went down hard, crumpling to the floor with a grunt of pain and surprise. I didn't wait to see if he'd get up. I leaped over his prone form and ran, my bare feet slapping against the cold concrete of the walkway. The night air bit into my skin as I raced towards my car, fumbling in my pajama pocket for the keys. Behind me, I could hear the man cursing, the sound of him struggling to his feet, spurring me on faster. I reached my car and yanked open the door, practically diving inside. My hands shook as I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life just as the man appeared in my rearview mirror, stumbling towards me with a hand pressed to his bleeding head. I threw the car into reverse and peeled out of the parking lot, gravel spraying in my wake. As I fishtailed onto the highway, I grabbed my phone from where it sat on the passenger seat. My fingers shook as I dialed 911, my eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights gaining on me. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's calm voice nearly brought me to tears. I need help, I gasped out. I'm driving east on Highway 20, just left the Pinewood Motel. The man there, he tried to break into my room. I think he was going to... I couldn't finish the sentence, the reality of what had almost happened finally hitting me. The operator's voice turned soothing. It's all right, ma'am, you're safe now. Can you tell me your name and describe what happened? As I recounted the events of the night, my eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, watching the motel recede into the distance. Part of me expected to see a car speeding after me, but the highway remained empty. By the time I finished my story, red and blue lights were flashing in my mirror. The operator assured me it was the police she'd dispatched and instructed me to pull over. As I eased onto the shoulder, I felt the first glimmer of relief. 2 officers approached my car, their hands resting cautiously on their holsters. I rolled down my window, the cool night air a sharp contrast to the stuffy heat of my adrenaline-fueled drive. "Ma'am," one of the officers said, shining his flashlight into my car. "Are you all right? Are you injured?" I shook my head, suddenly aware of how I must look, wild-eyed in my pajamas with no shoes. "I'm okay," I managed to say. He didn't. I got away. The next few hours passed in a blur. More police cars arrived, heading towards the motel. I was asked to give a statement, then another, recounting every detail I could remember. They brought me a shock blanket at some point, though whether it was for the cold or my frayed nerves, I couldn't say. As dawn began to break, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, an officer approached me with news. They'd found the man at the motel, nursing a nasty head wound. A search of the premises had turned up evidence linking him to several unsolved missing persons cases in the area. "You did good," the officer told me, his eyes kind. "You trusted your instincts and you fought back. You probably saved your own life tonight." I nodded numbly, unable to fully process his words. All I could think about was how close I'd come to being another statistic, another face on a missing poster. As I watched the sun rise over the highway, casting long shadows across the asphalt, I made a silent vow. I would never ignore that little voice of intuition again. In a world where monsters wore human faces and lurked in the most ordinary places, trusting my gut might be the thing that kept me alive. The officer offered to escort me to the next town, where I could rest at a reputable hotel before continuing my journey. As I followed the patrol car down the highway, leaving the Pinewood Motel far behind, I felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. I had faced my worst nightmare and come out the other side. I was a survivor, and with each mile that passed beneath my tires, I felt a little stronger, a little more like myself again. The open road stretched out before me, full of possibility and, yes, potential danger. But I was ready for it now. Whatever came next, I would face it head-on, with my eyes wide open and my instincts on high alert. After all, sometimes the most important journey isn't the one that takes you across the country. It's the one that teaches you who you really are and what you're capable of when pushed to the edge. Story 2. The ping of a new ride request jolted me from my late-night stupor. I'd been dozing at the wheel, parked in a dimly lit lot outside a 24-hour diner, waiting for that last fare to make my night worthwhile. The clock on my dashboard read 2:17 a.m. as I swiped to accept the ride and pulled out onto the empty street. The app directed me to a bar called The Rusty Nail. Fitting name for a place still serving drinks at this hour. As I approached, I could see a few patrons stumbling out, their laughter echoing in the quiet night. My passenger, however, wasn't among the revelers. He emerged from the shadows beside the building, a tall figure in a dark jacket moving with surprising steadiness for someone leaving a bar at this hour. As he slid into the back seat, the smell of whiskey wafted forward, but his eyes were sharp and alert when they met mine in the rearview mirror. "Evening," I said, glancing at my phone to confirm his name. "James, right? Heading to Oakwood Avenue?" He nodded curtly, his gaze already shifting to the window. "That's right. Let's go." I pulled away from the curb, the silence in the car broken only by the low hum of the engine and the occasional ping from my phone. We'd gone about 2 blocks when James's phone began to ring. The shrill tone sliced through the quiet, making me jump slightly. James made no move to answer it. His jaw tightened, and I watched in the mirror as his hand clenched into a fist on his lap. After several rings, the sound cut off, only to start up again almost immediately. "Do you need to get that out?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Sounds like someone really wants to reach you." "No," he replied, his voice hard. "Just drive." The ringing continued on and off for the next few minutes. I tried to focus on the road, but I couldn't help noticing James's increasing agitation. His leg bounced nervously, and he kept glancing over his shoulder as if expecting to see someone following us. Finally, the phone fell silent. The tension in the car was palpable, and I found myself gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. Just a drunk guy avoiding an angry girlfriend, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. Then the voicemail notification chimed. James muttered a curse under his breath and pulled out his phone. I expected him to delete the message, but to my surprise, he put the phone to his ear and listened. I couldn't make out the words, but the voice on the other end was loud and angry. As the message played, I caught fragments of the one-sided conversation. "Can't believe you botched the job. Loose ends everywhere. Fix this or we're all..." The color drained from James's face as he listened. When the message ended, he let the phone drop to his lap, staring blankly out the window. My heart was racing now. Botched job? Loose ends? This was starting to sound like something far more serious than relationship drama. I tried to keep my voice steady as I spoke. "Everything okay back there?" James's eyes snapped to mine in the mirror. For a moment, I saw raw fear in them before his expression hardened. "Fine," he said shortly. "Just some work stuff. Nothing to worry about." I nodded and turned my attention back to the road, but my mind was whirling. What kind of work stuff involved botched jobs and loose ends? Nothing legal, that was for sure. We stopped at a red light, the car idling in the pool of yellow from the street lamp overhead. I drummed my fingers on the steering wheel, hyper-aware of every movement from the back seat. That's when I saw it. As James shifted in his seat, his jacket fell open slightly. There, tucked into his waistband, was the unmistakable shape of a handgun. My breath caught in my throat. I forced myself to look away, praying he hadn't noticed me notice. The light seemed to be taking an eternity to change. In that moment, every instinct screamed at me to jump out of the car and run, but I knew that would only make things worse. I had to stay calm, get to his destination, and end this ride as quickly as possible. The light finally turned green, and I pressed the gas perhaps a little too eagerly. James must have sensed my unease because he leaned forward slightly. "How much longer?" he asked, his voice taut with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Impatience, worry, threat? I glanced at the GPS. "About 10 minutes, I replied, proud of how steady I kept my voice. "Traffic's light at this hour." He nodded and settled back, but I could feel his eyes on me now. The weight of his gaze and the knowledge of the weapon he carried made the short hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My mind raced through scenarios, each one worse than the last. Was he running from something? Going to finish some job that had gone wrong? Was I unknowingly acting as a getaway driver for some crime? I considered my options. I could pull over and demand he get out. But if he was as dangerous as I feared, that could end badly for me. I could try to subtly alert someone, but who? It was the middle of the night, and the streets were deserted. Calling 911 was out of the question. I'd never be able to do it without him noticing. As I wrestled with my limited choices, James's phone rang again. This time he answered it. "Yeah," he said, his voice low and tense. He listened for a moment, then, "No, I'm on my way now. Give me 20 minutes. There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. James's next words made my blood run cold. "I'll take care of it permanently. Just have everything ready when I get there." He ended the call and caught my eye in the mirror. The look he gave me made it clear he knew I'd overheard. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then his hand moved toward his waistband. "Take the next right," he said, his voice deadly calm. It wasn't a request. My hand shook as I flipped on the turn signal. This was no longer about getting a passenger to their destination. This was about survival. As I turned onto a quiet residential street, my mind raced. Maybe I could crash the car deliberately. Surely someone would come to investigate. But at this speed, it would have to be a serious crash, and I had no guarantee I'd walk away from it. "Pull over here," James instructed, gesturing to a spot between two streetlights where the shadows were deepest. I complied, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he must be able to hear it. As the car rolled to a stop, I heard the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. "Turn off the engine and give me your phone," James said, his voice eerily calm. With trembling hands, I did as he asked. As I passed my phone back to him, I caught a glimpse of the gun now openly held in his lap. It looked enormous in the confines of the car. "Please," I said, hating the tremor in my voice. "I don't want any trouble. I didn't see or hear anything, I swear." James was silent for a moment, and I held my breath, waiting for the sound that might be the last thing I ever heard. "I believe you," he said finally. "But I can't take any chances. You're going to drive me where I need to go, no questions asked. After that, if you're smart, you'll forget this night ever happened. Understand?" I nodded vigorously, relief flooding through me even as a new wave of fear took hold. I was alive for now, but I was also being kidnapped by an armed man who had all but admitted to planning a murder. "Good," James said. "Now we're going to take a little detour. Head toward the industrial district." As I started the engine with shaking hands, I realized this nightmare was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Whatever job James had to finish, I was now a part of it. And as the city streets rolled by outside, each one taking us further from safety and deeper into darkness, I wondered if I'd live to see the dawn. My one hope clung to a desperate thought. At some point, he'd have to let his guard down. And when he did, I'd be ready. I had to be, because out here in the dark with a desperate man and a loaded gun, my life depended on it. Story 3. I never thought I'd find a dead body on my route, but then again, I never thought I'd be a garbage man either. The October air bit at my exposed skin as I hopped off the truck, my breath visible in the pre-dawn darkness. This was the worst part of the job. The early mornings when the world was still asleep, and I was out here dealing with everyone's trash. "Hurry up, Mike," Jake called from the driver's seat. "We're behind schedule." I grunted in response, grabbing the first dumpster of the day. The metal was cold against my gloved hands as I wheeled it to the truck. The hydraulic lift groaned, tipping the contents into the compactor with a series of thuds and clangs. As I was about to return the empty dumpster, something caught my eye. A scrap of fabric hung over the edge, fluttering in the breeze. I reached out to pull it free, thinking it was just another piece of discarded clothing. My stomach dropped as the fabric came away in my hand. It was a jacket, a man's jacket, stained dark with what could only be blood. "What the hell?" I muttered, turning the garment over in my hands. The back was slashed, the cuts ragged and violent. This wasn't some accident or nosebleed. This was something much worse. I glanced around, suddenly aware of how alone I was in the quiet street. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence more oppressive. My heart raced as I realized I was holding evidence of what could only be a violent crime. "Mike, what's the holdup?" Jake's voice made me jump. I stuffed the jacket into my work vest. "Nothing," I called back, my voice cracking. "Just stuck on something." As I climbed back into the truck, my mind raced. Should I call the police? But what would I tell them? That I found a bloody jacket in the trash? They'd probably laugh it off. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. But as we continued our route, that nagging feeling wouldn't leave me. Each dumpster we emptied felt like it might hold another clue, another piece to a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. 3 stops later, I found myself staring at a pair of shoes poking out from beneath a pile of garbage bags. Men's shoes, expensive looking, with dark stains on the leather. My hands trembled as I lifted the bag covering them, revealing more clothing. A shirt, pants, all bearing the same telltale stains. "Jesus," I whispered, quickly covering everything back up. I couldn't ignore this anymore. This was a pattern, and a disturbing one at that. "Jake," I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. "I think we need to call this in." Jake's annoyed face appeared at the window. "Call what in? We're already behind, Mike. Whatever it is can wait." I shook my head. "No, man, you don't understand. I've been finding things. Bloody clothes. I think someone's been dumping evidence along our route." Jake's expression shifted from annoyance to concern. He climbed down from the cab, joining me by the dumpster. "Show me," he said. I pulled out the jacket, then lifted the garbage bag to reveal the shoes and other clothing. Jake's face paled. "Holy shit," he breathed. "You think it's all connected?" I nodded. "Has to be. This is the second stop where I've found stuff like this. Who knows what else is out there?" Jake ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting up and down the empty street. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, we call it in, but we keep moving. If someone's watching..." The thought sent a chill down my spine. He was right. If this was a killer disposing of evidence, they might be nearby, making sure their tracks were covered. We called dispatch, reporting our findings without stopping the truck. They promised to send police to check the dumpsters we'd already emptied. Meanwhile, we were to continue our route but report anything else suspicious. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of tension and hyper-awareness. Every dumpster became a potential crime scene, every shadow a lurking threat. My hands shook as I emptied each container, dreading what I might find. 2 hours later, we hit pay dirt again. This time, it was a small neighborhood dumpster, the kind shared by a few houses. As soon as I opened the lid, the metallic smell of blood hit me. Swallowing hard, I peered inside. A large black garbage bag sat atop the other trash, tied tightly with rope. But the real horror was what lay beside it. A hacksaw, its blade dark with dried blood and other things I didn't want to identify. "Jake," I hissed, waving him over. "Look at this." He cursed under his breath as he saw the contents. "Don't touch anything," he warned. "I'm calling the cops directly this time." As Jake made the call, I stood guard by the dumpster, my eyes scanning the quiet suburban street. The houses looked peaceful in the early morning light, their occupants likely still asleep, unaware of the horror lurking in their shared trash. A dog barked in the distance, making me jump. A car engine started a few blocks away. Every sound, every movement seemed sinister now. I found myself wondering about the residents. Did one of them know what was in this dumpster? Was the killer among them watching us right now? The wait for the police felt endless. When they finally arrived, their sirens silent but lights flashing, I felt a mix of relief and new anxiety. This was real. This was happening. The next few hours were a whirlwind of questions, statements, and barely contained nausea as the police examined the dumpster's contents. The black bag, as I'd feared, contained human remains. The victim hadn't been identified yet, but the officers assured us they'd keep us updated. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the crime scene, I found myself sitting on the curb, my head in my hands. Jake sat beside me, uncharacteristically quiet. "You did good, Mike," he said finally. "If you hadn't noticed that jacket..." I nodded, unable to speak. The reality of what we'd discovered was still sinking in. We weren't just garbage men anymore, we were witnesses, maybe even heroes. But it didn't feel heroic. It felt terrifying. A detective approached us, her face grim but her eyes kind. "We're going to need you both to come down to the station," she said. "We have a few more questions and we need to go over your route in detail. There might be more evidence out there." As we stood to follow her, a chill ran down my spine. I turned, scanning the small crowd of onlookers that had gathered behind the police tape. Most were in pajamas or robes drawn out by the commotion. But one figure stood out, a man in a crisp suit, his face impassive as he watched the scene. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw something there that made my blood run cold. Recognition, calculation, threat. Before I could say anything, he turned and walked away, disappearing between two houses. I blinked, wondering if I'd imagined it. "You okay?" Jake asked, noticing my distraction. I shook my head, trying to clear it. "Yeah," I lied. It's a lot to process." As we climbed into the detective's car, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. We'd stumbled onto something dark, something dangerous, and I couldn't help but wonder, had we just caught a killer or had we simply alerted him to our presence? The garbage truck stood silently by the curb, our route unfinished. As we drove away, I realized that nothing would ever be the same. The streets I'd known so well, the routine I'd settled into, it all looked different now. Every dumpster was a potential crime scene, every early morning shadow a possible hiding place. I'd started the day as a garbage man. Now I felt like a marked man, caught in a story much bigger and more terrifying than I'd ever imagined. And somewhere out there, a killer was watching, waiting, planning their next move. As the detective's car turned the corner, leaving the crime scene behind, I made a silent vow. I would see this through no matter what. For the victim in the dumpster, for the safety of our community, and for my own peace of mind. The garbage man had become an unlikely detective, and I had a feeling my hardest days were still ahead. The streets may have looked the same, but everything had changed, and in the back of my mind a chilling thought lingered. In this deadly game of cat and mouse, was I the hunter or the hunted? Only time would tell. And in this city, time was measured in garbage routes, each one a potential path to another grisly discovery. Story 4. The ping of a new ride request cut through the quiet hum of late-night talk radio. I glanced at my phone, debating whether to call it a night or take one last fare. The surge pricing made my decision for me. Just one more ride, then home to my waiting bed. I accepted the request and pulled up to the curb outside the Rusty Nail, a dive bar on the outskirts of town. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting an eerie glow over the nearly empty parking lot. A lone figure stumbled out of the bar, weaving his way towards my car. As he got closer, I could see he was a big guy, easily over 6 feet tall and built like a linebacker. His eyes were unfocused, and he reeked of booze as he slumped into the back seat. "Where to, buddy?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light and friendly. He mumbled something unintelligible, then hiccuped. Great. Just what I needed. An incoherent drunk for my last ride of the night. "I'm going to need an address," I said, a little louder this time. "Where am I taking you?" He leaned forward, his breath hot on my neck. "Just drive," he slurred. "I'll tell you where to go. Every instinct told me to kick this guy out of my car and cancel the ride. But I'd already started the trip, and I didn't want to risk a bad rating or a complaint to Uber. So against my better judgment, I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. "Head north," he grunted, settling back into his seat. I merged onto the highway, the late-night traffic thin around us. In the rearview mirror, I could see my passenger's head lolling against the window, his eyes half closed. Maybe he'd pass out and I could just drop him at the nearest police station. After about 15 minutes of driving in silence, he suddenly sat up straight. "Take the next exit," he ordered, his voice sounding clearer than before. I signaled and moved into the exit lane, noticing as I did that we were heading into a pretty isolated area. Warehouses and abandoned factories loomed in the darkness, their empty windows like vacant eyes staring out at the night. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked, unable to keep the nervousness out of my voice. "Just keep driving," he growled. "Turn right up here." As I made the turn onto a narrow road lined with overgrown weeds, a chill ran down my spine. This definitely wasn't right. We were miles from any residential areas, and the only buildings I could see were long-abandoned industrial sites. "Look, man," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think you might have given me the wrong directions. Why don't we head back towards town and—" "I said keep driving," he shouted, slamming his fist against the back of my seat. I flinched, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. The veneer of drunkenness had disappeared entirely, replaced by a cold, calculated anger that was far more terrifying. Okay, I said, holding up one hand in a placating gesture. Just tell me where we're going. He leaned forward again, and this time I could feel something hard pressing against the back of my seat. My blood ran cold as I realized it was probably a gun. You're going to take me where I tell you, he said, his voice low and menacing. And if you try anything stupid, you'll regret it. Understand? I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady if I spoke. My mind raced, trying to figure a way out of this nightmare. I thought about my phone, sitting in its holder on the dashboard. If I could just reach it, maybe I could call for help. Eyes on the road, he barked, as if reading my thoughts. Both hands on the wheel where I can see them. I complied, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. We drove on in tense silence, the buildings around us growing more dilapidated and spread out. I tried to memorize street names, landmarks, anything that might help me if I managed to get away. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, he told me to stop in front of a rundown warehouse. The windows were boarded up and graffiti covered the walls. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. Turn off the engine, he commanded. I did as he said, my hands shaking as I pulled the key from the ignition. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own ragged breathing. Now, very slowly, I want you to get out of the car. No sudden moves. I opened the door, the cool night air hitting me like a slap. As I stood up, my legs felt weak, barely able to support my weight. I turned to face my passenger, getting my first clear look at him in the dim streetlight. He was younger than I'd initially thought, probably in his early 30s. His face was hard, with cold eyes that seemed to bore right through me. In his right hand, he held a pistol pointed steadily at my chest. Walk towards the building, he said, gesturing with the gun. Nice and slow. As we approached the warehouse, 1,000 scenarios ran through my head, each one worse than the last. Was he going to rob me, kill me, use me as some kind of hostage? I thought about my family, my friends. Would they ever know what happened to me? When we reached the door, he told me to open it. I half expected it to be locked, but the handle turned easily. The hinges creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a cavernous space filled with shadows. Inside, he said, prodding me with the gun. I stepped into the darkness, the musty smell of abandonment filling my nostrils. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out the vague shapes of old machinery and stacks of rotting crates. Over there, he said, pointing to a corner where a single chair sat ominously in a pool of moonlight streaming through a broken window. My legs felt like lead as I walked towards it. This was it, I thought. This was where I was going to die. But as I reached the chair, something unexpected happened. The man lowered his gun and let out a heavy sigh. Sit down, he said, but the menace had drained from his voice. He sounded tired. Confused, I sank into the chair, watching as he paced back and forth in front of me. I'm sorry, he said finally, running a hand through his hair. I didn't know what else to do. I stared at him, unable to comprehend this sudden change. What's going on? I managed to ask. He stopped pacing and looked at me, his eyes filled with a desperation I hadn't noticed before. My daughter, he said. They took my daughter. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. Who took her? I asked, my fear slowly being replaced by bewilderment. I owe some people money, he said, his voice breaking. A lot of money. I couldn't pay, so they took her. Said I have 48 hours to come up with the cash, or... He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process this information. This man, who minutes ago I'd been sure was going to kill me, was now pouring out his heart to me. Why me? I finally asked. Why bring me here? He laughed, a hollow, mirthless sound. I don't know, I've been driving around all night trying to figure out what to do. When I saw your car, I thought maybe if I had a hostage, I could negotiate or... I don't know. It was stupid, I'm sorry. He sank to the floor, his head in his hands. The gun lay forgotten beside him. In that moment, he didn't look dangerous. He looked broken. I knew I should run. The door was right there. My car was outside. I could be gone before he even realized what was happening. But something held me in place. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the parent in me, unable to ignore a child in danger. "How much do you owe?" I heard myself asking. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. 50,000, he said. Might as well be 1,000,000. I don't have anything close to that. I nodded, my mind racing. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "Okay, let's think this through. There has to be a way to get your daughter back without resorting to this." He stared at me in disbelief. "Why are you helping me? After what I did?" I shrugged, not entirely sure of the answer myself. "Because your daughter needs help, and right now I'm the only one who knows she needs it." For the next few hours we talked. He told me everything, how he'd gotten into debt, who had his daughter, where they were holding her. We brainstormed ideas, made plans, discarded them, and made new ones. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the broken windows, we had a plan. It wasn't perfect, and it was definitely dangerous, but it was a hell of a lot better than kidnapping random Uber drivers. We walked out of the warehouse together, squinting in the early morning sunlight. As we approached my car, he held out the gun to me, grip first. "Here," he said. "You should probably hang on to this, and thank you. I know it doesn't make up for what I did, but thank you." I took the gun, surprised by its weight. "Don't thank me yet," I said. "We've still got a lot of work to do." As we drove away from the warehouse, I couldn't help but marvel at the strange turns life can take. I'd started the night as an Uber driver looking for one last fare. Now I was part of a rescue mission to save a little girl I'd never met. I glanced at the man sitting beside me, his face set in grim determination. I didn't know if our plan would work. I didn't know if we'd both make it out of this alive. But I did know one thing: this was going to be one hell of a story to tell the next time someone asked me about my craziest Uber ride. Story 5. The radio crackled to life, breaking the monotony of my late-night patrol. "Unit 17, we've got a report of an abandoned vehicle on Highway 43, mile marker 27. Can you check it out?" I suppressed a sigh. Abandoned vehicles were common enough, usually just breakdowns or empty gas tanks. But something in the dispatcher's tone made me sit up straighter. 10-4, dispatch, I'm on my way, I responded, flipping on my cruiser's lights as I made a U-turn on the empty highway. The night was unusually dark, a new moon hidden behind a blanket of clouds that threatened rain. My headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating the occasional reflective road sign or startled animal eyes in the underbrush. As I approached mile marker 27, I slowed down, scanning the shoulder. There it was, a dark sedan, pulled over haphazardly, half on the grass. I pulled up behind it, positioning my cruiser to shield us both from any oncoming traffic. Stepping out of my vehicle, I was immediately struck by the silence. Out here, miles from town, the quiet was usually broken by the chirp of crickets or the rustle of wind through the trees. Tonight, there was nothing. It was as if the world was holding its breath. I approached the sedan cautiously, one hand resting on my holstered weapon. "Hello," I called out. "Highway Patrol, anyone here?" No response. As I drew closer, I noticed the driver's door was slightly ajar. A quick glance inside confirmed what I'd already suspected. The car was empty. But something wasn't right. The keys were still in the ignition, and a cell phone sat on the passenger seat, its screen occasionally lighting up with incoming notifications. I reached in and touched the hood. It was still warm. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. Whoever had been driving this car hadn't been gone long, but where were they now? I radioed in my findings, requesting backup in a tow truck. As I waited for a response, movement in my peripheral vision caught my attention. I turned, shining my flashlight toward the tree line that bordered the highway. For a moment, I thought I saw something, a flash of pale color against the dark foliage. But as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. "Dispatch to Unit 17, the radio squawked. "Backup is en route. ETA 20 minutes. Tow truck dispatched." 10-4, I replied, my eyes still fixed on the spot where I'd seen something. "I'm going to do a preliminary search of the immediate area." I knew procedure dictated that I should wait for backup before investigating further. But 20 minutes was a long time. And if someone was out there hurt or in trouble, every second counted. Decision made, I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight from the cruiser and started toward the tree line. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a tangle of underbrush and tree trunks. As I reached the edge of the forest, I hesitated. The trees loomed before me, their branches seeming to reach out like gnarled fingers. Taking a deep breath, I stepped in. The darkness seemed to close in around me, muffling the sounds of the occasional passing car on the highway. My flashlight created a tunnel of visibility beyond which anything could be lurking. I swept it back and forth, searching for any sign of the driver. That's when I saw it. A few yards ahead, barely visible in the beam of my flashlight, was a disturbance in the forest floor. Moving closer, my heart sank. It was a drag mark, a wide swath where the leaves and twigs had been swept aside, as if something heavy had been pulled through, or someone. I followed the trail, my senses on high alert. The drag marks continued deeper into the woods, occasionally accompanied by what looked like footprints. One set, maybe two. It was hard to tell in the leaf litter. As I pressed on, the forest seemed to grow denser. Branches caught at my uniform, and more than once I had to duck under a low-hanging limb. The drag marks continued, a silent testimony to some unseen struggle. I lost track of how far I'd come, the highway long since swallowed up by the woods behind me. Just as I was considering turning back, I emerged into a small clearing, and there in the center was a sight that made my blood run cold. A mound of freshly turned earth about 6 feet long. My training kicked in, overriding the fear that threatened to paralyze me. I keyed my radio, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dispatch, this is Unit 17. I paused, swallowing hard. I've found what appears to be a fresh grave site in the woods off Highway 43, requesting immediate backup and forensic team." The radio crackled, but no response came through, just static. I tried again, my voice more urgent this time. "Dispatch, do you copy? This is Unit 17, requesting immediate backup." Nothing but static. A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, my hand flying to my gun. The beam of my flashlight danced wildly across the trees, revealing nothing but shadows and leaves. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out even the static of the radio. "This is the police!" I shouted, my voice sounding thin and reedy in the oppressive silence of the forest. "Show yourself!" More silence. Then, almost imperceptibly, a rustle of movement to my left. I spun, gun drawn now, flashlight searching frantically. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of something pale moving between the trees. A face? A hand? I couldn't be sure. "Stop! Police!" I yelled. But the figure, if it was a figure, was gone. My mind raced. I was alone in the woods, at night, with no radio contact, standing next to what was almost certainly a fresh grave. And someone or something was out there watching me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get back to my cruiser and call for every available unit in the county. But I couldn't. If there was even a chance that the person from the car was out here, alive and in need of help, I had to stay. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "My name is Officer Sarah Collins," I called out, hoping my voice sounded calmer than I felt. "I'm here to help. If you can hear me, please come out. You're not in trouble." A rustling sound came from the far side of the clearing. I turned slowly, keeping my gun trained on the spot. "Come out slowly with your hands where I can see them," I ordered. The bushes parted and a figure stepped into the clearing. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see it was a man, his clothes dirty and torn, his face a mask of terror and... Was that relief? "Oh, thank God," he sobbed, stumbling forward. "Please, you have to help me. He's still out here." "Freeze," I shouted, my gun still raised. "Don't come any closer. Keep your hands where I can see them." The man stopped, raising his trembling hands. "Please," he begged. "You don't understand. We have to get out of here. He'll kill us both." "Who?" I demanded, my eyes darting between the man and the surrounding woods. "Who's out here?" Before he could answer, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night. It came from somewhere behind me, deep in the woods. The man's eyes widened in horror. "He's coming," he whispered. In that moment, I made a decision. Procedure be damned, we needed to get out of these woods now. "Move!" I ordered, gesturing with my gun toward the way I'd come. "Back to the highway. Go!" The man didn't need to be told twice. He took off running, crashing through the underbrush. I followed close behind, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as we ran. Branches whipped at my face. Roots seemed to reach up to trip me, but I pushed on. Behind us, I could hear movement, the sound of someone or something in pursuit. We burst out of the tree line onto the highway shoulder, gasping for breath. My cruiser sat where I'd left it, a beacon of safety in the night. "Get in!" I yelled, fumbling for my keys. As we scrambled into the cruiser, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. There, at the edge of the woods, stood a figure. In the red and blue flashes of my cruiser's lights, I caught a glimpse of a face twisted into a grotesque smile. I slammed the car into drive and peeled out onto the highway, tires screeching. In my rearview mirror, I saw the figure step out onto the road, watching us go. As we sped into the night, my radio suddenly crackled to life. Unit 17, this is dispatch. Backup is on scene at mile marker 27. What's your 20? I looked at the terrified man beside me, then back at the empty road behind us. Whatever had happened tonight, whatever was waiting for us back there in the woods, one thing was clear. This was far from over. Dispatch, I replied, my voice shaky but determined. We're going to need a lot more than backup. Story 6. The glow of my phone illuminated the dark alley ahead. 10 minutes late, it mocked. I revved my motorcycle, the rumble echoing off the grimy walls. This shortcut better be worth it, or I'd be kissing my 5-star rating goodbye. I'm Danny, just another cog in the relentless machine of the gig economy. Tonight, like every night, I'm zipping through the city on my beat-up Kawasaki, delivering overpriced burritos to folks too comfortable to venture out themselves. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills, most of them anyway. The alley loomed before me, a narrow canyon of brick and shadow. My headlight cut a pale swath through the darkness, revealing scattered trash and the occasional scurrying rat. The stench of rotting garbage and stale urine assaulted my nostrils, even through my helmet. But time was money, and this shortcut would shave precious minutes off my delivery. I eased off the throttle, letting the bike coast into the alley's mouth. The sounds of the city faded, replaced by the soft purr of my engine and the crunch of gravel under my tires. My headlight bounced off broken windows and graffiti-covered walls, creating a disorienting dance of light and shadow. Halfway through, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Something darted across the beam of my headlight, too quick to identify. Probably just another rat, I told myself, but a shiver ran down my spine all the same. That's when I saw it. A thin line stretching across the alley right at neck height. Shit, I cursed, instinctively ducking as I slammed on the brakes. The bike's tires squealed in protest, skidding on the loose gravel. For a heart-stopping moment, I was sure I'd clothesline myself on whatever the hell that was strung across my path. But luck or skill or sheer desperation kept me upright. I came to a stop just inches from the obstacle, my heart pounding in my ears. In the harsh glare of my headlight, I could now see it clearly. A length of sturdy rope pulled taut between the buildings on either side of the alley. "What the fuck?" I muttered, my voice shaky even to my own ears. This was no accident, no piece of trash blown into an unfortunate position. This was deliberate. A soft scraping sound to my left made me whip my head around. In the shadows beyond my headlight's reach, I caught a glimpse of movement, then another to my right. My blood ran cold as realization dawned. I wasn't alone in this alley. Shadowy figures emerged from doorways and behind dumpsters, their features obscured by the darkness. I counted at least 4, maybe more, slowly converging on my position. They moved with purpose, with menace. "Hey man, I don't want any trouble," I called out, trying to keep the fear from my voice. "I'm just making a delivery, okay?" No response, just the slow, steady approach of the shadows. My mind raced. Was this a robbery, a gang initiation, or something worse? The weight of the night's earnings in my pocket suddenly felt like a target painted on my back. I revved the engine, hoping the noise might scare them off. Instead, it seemed to spur them on. They quickened their pace, closing the distance between us. Fight or flight instinct kicked in, and flight was winning by a mile, but the rope blocked my path forward, and the figures behind me cut off my retreat. I was trapped. One of the shadows spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "Turn off the bike. Fat chance, pal." I gunned the engine, my tires spinning in the loose gravel as I aimed for the narrowest gap between two of the approaching figures. It was a desperate move, but desperation was all I had left. They lunged for me as I shot past, hands grasping at my jacket. I felt fingers brush my arm, but momentum carried me through. The bike fishtailed wildly as I regained control, nearly sending me into a wall. Behind me, angry shouts erupted. The thunder of running feet told me the chase was on. I leaned low over the handlebars, urging every ounce of speed from my loyal Kawasaki. The end of the alley loomed ahead, a rectangle of distant streetlights and safety. Something whizzed past my head, a rock or bottle, I couldn't tell. Another glanced off my helmet, the impact sending a jolt through my skull. These guys weren't playing around. I burst out of the alley like a cork from a champagne bottle, tires squealing as I took the turn onto the main street far too fast. Car horns blared as I cut across lanes, but I didn't dare look back. I just drove, putting as much distance between me and that nightmare alley as possible. It wasn't until I was halfway across town that I finally allowed myself to slow down. My hands shook as I pulled over, gulping in deep breaths of the cool night air. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me feeling shaky and nauseous. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers. The customer's angry messages about their late delivery glowed on the screen. Part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. If they only knew. But what exactly had just happened? The rope across the alley, the shadowy figures. It was like something out of a nightmare. Had I just narrowly escaped being robbed, or was it something even more sinister? I should call the police, I thought. But what would I tell them? That I took an ill-advised shortcut and some scary shadows chased me. It sounded ridiculous even in my own head. My phone buzzed again, another delivery request popping up. The gig economy wait for no one, not even for narrow escapes from dark alleys. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the accept button. Every instinct screamed at me to go home, to call it a night and try to forget this ever happened. But the reality of my empty bank account and looming rent payment won out. With a resigned sigh, I accepted the new order. As I kick-started the bike, a thought nagged at me. Those guys in the alley, they had been waiting. The rope, their positions. It wasn't random. They'd set a trap and I'd ridden right into it. How many other delivery drivers had they ambushed? How many hadn't been as lucky as me? The street suddenly felt different as I merged back into traffic. Every alley was a potential ambush, every shadowy figure a threat. The city I thought I knew had revealed a darker side tonight, and I couldn't unsee it. I made the delivery some kid's late-night pizza craving in record time, sticking to well-lit main roads even when my GPS suggested quicker routes. The customer seemed annoyed by my jittery demeanor, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Let them dock my rating. At least I was alive to worry about it. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I stopped at a light, I found myself scanning the sidewalks, the alleys, looking for those shadowy figures. Were they still out there, looking for me? Had I seen something I wasn't supposed to see? By the time my shift ended, the sky was lightening with the first hints of dawn. I should have felt relieved. I'd made it through the night after all. But as I parked my bike outside my dingy apartment building, a new worry settled in the pit of my stomach. Those guys knew what I looked like now. They'd seen my bike, maybe even caught a glimpse of my delivery company's logo on my jacket. What if they came looking for me? I trudged up the stairs, my body aching from the night's tension. As I fumbled with my keys, a flicker of movement in the stairwell below made me freeze. I held my breath, straining to hear over the pounding of my heart. Nothing. Just the usual creaks and groans of the old building. I let myself into my apartment, throwing every lock and chain into place behind me. As I collapsed onto my worn-out couch, I realized something with grim certainty. I couldn't keep doing this job. The risk wasn't worth it anymore. But as my eyes drifted to the pile of unpaid bills on my coffee table, reality set in. What choice did I have? In this economy, in this city, you take the work you can get, even if it means risking your neck every night. I closed my eyes, knowing sleep wouldn't come easily. The shadows from that alley would haunt my dreams, I was sure of it. But tomorrow night, I'd be back out there, delivering food to strangers and hoping that every order wasn't my last. Because in the end, that's the real horror story. Not the monsters lurking in dark alleys, but the system that forces us to face them night after night, just to survive. And as I drifted off into an uneasy sleep, I wondered how many other drivers were out there right now, unknowingly riding into their own dark alleys, their own twisted traps. The city never sleeps, they say, and neither do its dangers. Story 7. The acrid smell of burning rubber assaulted my nostrils as I pulled onto the shoulder, gravel crunching beneath my tires. Ahead, a sedan sat awkwardly tilted, its right rear wheel a mangled mess of steel and shredded rubber. Just another day on Highway 61. I'd been with the highway patrol for 15 years, and in that time I'd seen just about everything. Drunk drivers, high-speed chases, overturned semis, you name it. But something about this scene made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I stepped out of my cruiser, adjusting my hat against the glare of the setting sun. "Everything all right here?" I called out, approaching the vehicle. A man emerged from the driver's side, his face etched with relief. "Oh, thank God," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "I thought I was going to be stuck out here all night." I nodded, my eyes scanning the area out of habit. We were in a pretty isolated stretch of highway, nothing but cornfields and the occasional billboard for miles. "Blowout?" I asked, gesturing to the ruined tire. "Yeah," he replied, shaking his head. "Must have hit something back there. Didn't even see it coming." I crouched down to examine the damage. The tire was shredded all right, but something about the way the metal was bent didn't look quite right for a simple blowout. I'd seen my fair share of tire damage, and this looked almost deliberate. "You got a spare?" I asked, straightening up. The man nodded, already moving to the trunk. "Yeah, but I've never changed a tire before. Was hoping someone would come along to help." I smiled, trying to ignore the growing unease in my gut. "Well, you're in luck. I've changed more tires than I can count. Let's get you back on the road." As we worked on changing the tire, I tried to engage the man in conversation, hoping to put my finger on what was bothering me. "So, where you headed?" "Oh, just passing through," he said a little too quickly. "On my way to visit family in the next state over." I nodded, noting how he avoided specifics. "Long drive?" "Yeah, been on the road since this morning," he replied, his eyes darting to the cornfields and back. I followed his gaze, half expecting to see something lurking among the tall stalks. But there was nothing, just the wind rustling through the crops. As we finished up with the tire change, I decided to push a little harder. "Mind if I take a look at your license and registration? Just standard procedure when we assist with roadside issues." The man's demeanor changed instantly. His shoulders tensed and a flicker of something passed across his face. Fear? Anger? It was gone so quickly I almost thought I'd imagined it. "Sure, no problem," he said, his voice carefully neutral. He reached into the car and pulled out his wallet, handing over his license. "The registration's in the glove compartment. Let me just grab that for you." As he leaned into the car, I took a moment to examine his license. John Smith. Even the name seemed generic, almost too perfect. I ran my thumb over the surface, feeling for the telltale ridges of a genuine ID. Everything seemed in order, but that nagging feeling wouldn't leave me. He emerged with the registration, and I took my time looking it over. Everything matched up, the name, the vehicle description. By all accounts, this should have been a routine stop. But then I noticed something. A small detail, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. The registration was new, issued just a week ago, for a car that, by its appearance and mileage, was at least 5 years old. I was about to question him about it when a sound caught my attention. A muffled thump coming from the trunk of the car. If I hadn't been standing right next to it, I might have missed it entirely. The man heard it too. I saw his eyes widen just for a second before he plastered on a smile. "Probably just my luggage shifting around," he said a little too loudly. "You know how it is on these bumpy roads." I nodded slowly, my hand instinctively moving to rest on my holster. "Mind if I take a look in the trunk just to be sure everything's secure back there?" His smile faltered just for a moment. "Is that really necessary, officer? I'm sure it's fine. We've already taken up so much of your time." "It'll only take a second," I said, keeping my tone light but firm. "Better safe than sorry, right?" He hesitated, and in that moment I knew. Whatever was in that trunk, it wasn't luggage. "Sir," I said, my voice taking on an edge of authority, "I'm going to need you to open the trunk." He looked at me, then at the trunk, then back at me. I could almost see the gears turning in his head, weighing his options. Then without warning, he bolted. He didn't get far. 15 years on the job had kept me in pretty good shape, and I tackled him before he'd made it 10 steps. We hit the gravel hard, and I heard him grunt in pain. "Stay down!" I shouted, wrestling to get his arms behind his back. He struggled, but I managed to get the cuffs on him. As I caught my breath, I became aware of a new sound. Muffled cries, definitely coming from the trunk. My blood ran cold as I realized the implications. I hauled the man to his feet and marched him back to my cruiser, practically throwing him into the back seat. Then I ran back to his car, fumbling with the keys I'd grabbed from him. The trunk popped open and I found myself staring into the terrified eyes of a young woman. She was bound and gagged, her face streaked with tears. My heart pounded as I quickly untied her, helping her out of the trunk. "It's okay," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "You're safe now. I'm a highway patrol officer. Can you tell me your name?" She nodded, still shaking. "Sarah," she managed to say between sobs. "Sarah Thompson. He took me from the gas station. I thought... "It's all right," I said, wrapping a shock blanket around her shoulders. "You're going to be okay. I'm going to call this in. Get you some help." As I radioed for backup and an ambulance, I couldn't help but think about how close this had come to ending differently. If I hadn't noticed those small inconsistencies, if I hadn't trusted my instincts. I looked over at the man in my cruiser, his head bowed in defeat, then back at Sarah, who was slowly regaining her composure. In that moment, I was reminded why I became a highway patrol officer in the first place. It wasn't about writing tickets or chasing speeders. It was about this, being in the right place at the right time, noticing the things others might miss, and potentially saving a life. The sound of sirens in the distance snapped me back to the present. There would be questions to answer, reports to file, an investigation to assist with. But for now, I was just grateful for the training that had prepared me for this moment, and the instincts that had told me something wasn't right. As the first backup units arrived, lights flashing in the gathering dusk, I took a deep breath. The danger had passed, but the night was far from over. I straightened my hat, squared my shoulders, and prepared to brief my colleagues on the situation. Just another day on Highway 61? Not quite. But it was days like this that reminded me why I wore the badge. In a job where routine could easily lead to complacency, it paid to stay alert, to trust your gut, and to always look beyond the surface. The highway stretched out before me, disappearing into the darkness. Who knew what other secrets it held, what other lives might hang in the balance? But for tonight at least, one life had been saved, and that made all the difference in the world. Story 8. The dashboard clock flicked to 11:23 p.m. as I pulled into the hospital's pickup zone. Another late-night fare, another step closer to making rent. I'd been driving for Uber for 6 months now, and the novelty had long since worn off. But tonight, something felt different. A gnawing unease had settled in my stomach the moment I accepted this ride, and it only grew stronger as I scanned the entrance for my passenger. The app pinged, notifying me that Alex had been waiting for 2 minutes. I peered through the windshield, wiping away condensation with my sleeve. That's when I saw him. He emerged from the shadow of a concrete pillar, a tall, lanky figure in hospital scrubs and a rumpled overcoat. His movements were jerky, almost marionette-like, as he approached my car. I forced a smile and unlocked the doors. "Alex?" I called out as he slid into the back seat. The smell of antiseptic and something else, sweat, fear, filled the car. He nodded, his eyes darting around nervously. "Yeah, that's me. Let's go." I glanced at the app to confirm the destination, an address across town, about a 20-minute drive. As I pulled away from the curb, I caught sight of Alex's wrist in the rearview mirror. A plastic hospital bracelet glinted in the streetlights. My heart rate quickened. Hospital pickups weren't uncommon, but something about this felt off. I cleared my throat. "So, getting out late, huh? Night shift?" Alex's eyes met mine in the mirror, and I had to suppress a shudder. They were wide, too wide, with a manic energy that set my teeth on edge. "Something like that," he muttered, then fell silent, staring out the window. I tried to focus on the road, but my mind kept wandering. Why was he still in scrubs? Was he staff or a patient? The bracelet suggested the latter, but then why was he leaving so late? We'd been driving for about 5 minutes when Alex suddenly leaned forward, his face inches from the plexiglass divider. "We need to change course," he said, his voice tight with barely contained panic. "They'll be looking for me there." I felt a chill run down my spine. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can only take you to the destination in the app. If you want to go somewhere else, you'll need to change it on your end." Alex slumped back, running his hands through his disheveled hair. No, you don't understand. I can't go back there. They'll find me." My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Every instinct told me to pull over and end this ride, but we were on a stretch of empty highway with no safe place to stop. "Sir, are you feeling all right? Do you need me to take you back to the hospital?" "No," he shouted, making me jump. "Not the hospital. Never again. Just keep driving, please." I nodded, trying to keep my voice calm. "Okay, Alex, we'll keep going for now, but I need you to relax, all right?" He mumbled something incoherent and resumed staring out the window. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. That's when I noticed his hospital bracelet again. This time I caught a glimpse of the information printed on it. Psychiatric ward. My blood ran cold. I was alone in a car with an escaped psychiatric patient. I tried to think rationally. Most mental health patients aren't dangerous, I told myself. He could just be confused, scared, but the nagging voice in the back of my mind wouldn't be silenced. What if he was violent? What if he had a weapon? As if reading my thoughts, Alex's hand moved to his coat pocket. I tensed, ready to swerve if I saw anything resembling a weapon, but he just pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, staring at it intently. "They said I was sick," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Said I needed to stay, but I'm not sick. I'm chosen." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. My eyes flicked between the road and the rearview mirror, watching Alex's every move. "Do you believe in aliens?" he asked suddenly, his intense gaze locking onto mine in the mirror. I swallowed hard. I've never really thought about it much." Alex leaned forward again, his eyes blazing. "They're real, and they're here. They chose me to spread the message. But the doctors, they didn't understand. They wanted to silence me, to drug me into submission, but I escaped, and now I have to complete my mission." My mind raced. How do you respond to something like that? I opened my mouth, not sure what was going to come out, when suddenly the traffic ahead came to a standstill. Red brake lights stretched into the distance. "Looks like an accident up ahead," I said, grateful for the distraction. "We might be here a while." Alex's reaction was immediate and violent. He slammed his fists against the divider, making me flinch. "No, we can't stop. They'll find me." "Sir, please calm down," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I can't control the traffic. We'll get moving again soon." But Alex wasn't listening. He was becoming more agitated by the second, his eyes wild, muttering about at them, coming to get him. I watched in horror as he began to claw at the door handle. "Alex, stop!" I shouted. "Oh, you can't get out here. It's not safe." He ignored me, managing to get the door open. Without thinking, I reached back and grabbed his arm. "Please, just stay in the car. We'll figure this out." For a moment, he froze, staring at my hand on his arm. Then slowly, he settled back into his seat. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice suddenly clear and calm. I don't know what came over me. You're right, of course. It's not safe out there." I nodded, relieved. "It's okay. Let's just wait for the traffic to clear and we'll get you where you need to go." We sat in silence for a few minutes, inching forward with the traffic. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, but Alex seemed to have calmed down. He was staring at the crumpled paper again, his lips moving silently. Finally, the traffic began to move. As we picked up speed, Alex spoke again. "I've changed my mind. I need you to take me somewhere else." I tensed. "Where do you want to go?" "The radio tower," he said, his eyes gleaming with renewed intensity. "On Hillcrest Road. That's where I need to be. That's where I'll send the signal." My mind raced. Hillcrest Road was on the outskirts of town, isolated and rarely traveled, especially at this hour. Every instinct screamed that this was a bad idea. "I'm sorry, Alex, but I can't take you there. It's too far off route. I can take you to your original destination or back to the hospital, but that's it." His face darkened. "You don't understand. I have to get to that tower. The fate of humanity depends on it." I shook my head. "I'm sorry, but the answer is no. I'm going to take you back to the hospital. They can help you there." For a moment, Alex was silent. Then in a voice that sent chills down my spine, he said, "I didn't want to do this, but you leave me no choice." I saw his hand move in the mirror, reaching into his coat. My heart pounded as I prepared to swerve, to brake, to do anything to protect myself. But what he pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was a small metallic object, unlike anything I'd ever seen. It pulsed with an eerie blue light. "This is why they're after me," Alex said, his voice filled with awe. "This is how I'll call them, and now you'll help me whether you want to or not." As the strange device began to hum, filling the car with an otherworldly sound, I realized that this night was far from over. Whatever happened next, one thing was clear. I was now part of something much bigger and much more terrifying than a simple late-night Uber ride. Story 9. The clock struck midnight as the bell above the truck stop diner's door chimed. In walked Trouble, wearing a leather jacket and a scowl. "I'm Maggie, been slinging hash at Big Rick's pit stop for longer than I care to admit. Midnight to 8, that's my shift. You see all sorts here, truckers, drifters, folks running to or from something. But this guy, he was different, and not in a good way." I wiped down the counter, keeping one eye on the newcomer as he slid into a booth by the window. His fingers drummed an impatient rhythm on the tabletop, his eyes darting between the parking lot and his watch. "Coffee, hun?" I called out, more out of habit than hospitality. He grunted something that might have been a yes, so I poured him a cup and brought it over. Up close, I could see the sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the chill in the air outside. His eyes were bloodshot, darting around the diner like he expected Trouble to walk in any second. "Anything else I can get you?" I asked, pen poised over my order pad. He shook his head, then seemed to think better of it. "Actually, yeah, you got a phone I can use. My cell's dead." I pointed to the payphone by the restrooms. "Knock yourself out. It's a quarter for 3 minutes." He nodded, then pulled out his wallet. As he rifled through it for change, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. A small photo, partially obscured, of a woman. She looked terrified. The man caught me looking and snapped the wallet shut. "Thanks," he muttered, brushing past me toward the phone. I retreated behind the counter, pretending to busy myself with wiping down the already spotless surface. In reality, I was straining to hear his conversation. "Yeah, it's me," he spoke in a low voice. "No, I'm still on schedule. The delivery will happen tonight, don't worry." Delivery. Something about the way he said it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. This wasn't about a shipment of auto parts or fresh produce. "Look, I told you, it's handled," he continued, his voice rising slightly. "Just be at the drop point at 2, and make sure you bring the money this time." He slammed the receiver down and returned to his booth, draining his coffee in one long gulp. His eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw something there that chilled me to the bone, a cold, calculating look that said he'd do whatever it took to get what he wanted. "Everything okay, hun?" I asked, forcing a smile as I approached with the coffee pot. He nodded, pushing his cup forward for a refill. "Yeah, just some business to take care of." "Must be important business keeping you out this late," I probed, trying to keep my voice casual. His eyes narrowed slightly. "You always this chatty with your customers?" I shrugged, maintaining my friendly waitress demeanor. "Part of the job. Midnight shift can get lonely, you know." He grunted noncommittally, checking his watch again. It was an expensive-looking piece, at odds with his otherwise rough appearance. "Nice watch," I commented. "Gift from someone special." For a split second, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, guilt, regret, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that cold, hard look. "Something like that," he muttered. "Listen, I'm going to step out for a smoke. Keep an eye on my stuff, will you?" I nodded, watching as he headed for the door. As soon as it swung shut behind him, I was moving. I knew I only had a few minutes before he came back. His jacket was draped over the back of the booth. I hesitated for a moment. This was crossing a line. But the memory of that photo, of the fear in that woman's eyes, spurred me on. With shaking hands, I rifled through the pockets. Cigarettes, lighter, a wadded-up receipt, and then bingo. A small notebook, its pages filled with hastily scrawled notes. I flipped it open, my eyes widening as I scanned the contents. Dates, times, locations, and amounts, large amounts. This wasn't just some small-time operation. A name caught my eye. Maria, 2 a.m. delivery. My blood ran cold as I remembered the photo in his wallet. Was this Maria? Was she the delivery he had mentioned on the phone? The bell above the door chimed, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I shoved the notebook back into the jacket pocket and scrambled behind the counter, my heart pounding. It wasn't him, just a bleary-eyed trucker coming in for a late-night coffee. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. What was I going to do? I couldn't just let this happen, but what proof did I have? A glimpse of a photo, an overheard phone call, and a peek at a notebook that could mean anything. The door chimed again, and this time it was him. He strode back to his booth, eyeing me suspiciously. Had he noticed the jacket was slightly askew? Did he suspect I'd been snooping? "Everything okay, hon?" I asked, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "Can I get you anything else?" He shook his head, reaching for his wallet. "Nah, I gotta get going. Got a long night ahead." As he stood to leave, I made a split-second decision. I couldn't let him walk out that door without doing something. "You know," I said, trying to keep my voice casual, "we get all sorts in here. Truckers mostly, but sometimes folks who are in trouble." He paused, his hand on the door. "What's that supposed to mean?" I met his gaze steadily. "It means that if someone needed help, really needed it, there are people who would listen. No questions asked." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Doubt, regret. But then it was gone, replaced by that cold, hard look I'd seen earlier. "I don't know what you think you know, lady," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "But I suggest you forget about it. For your own good." With that, he was gone, the bell chiming in his wake. I watched through the window as he strode across the parking lot to a battered pickup truck. As he climbed in, I caught a glimpse of something in the truck bed, something large covered with a tarp. My hand shook as I reached for the phone behind the counter. I'd memorized the number years ago, never thinking I'd actually have to use it. "Hello, police. I'd like to report a suspicious person." As I relayed what I'd seen and heard, I kept my eyes on the parking lot. The pickup's taillights disappeared down the highway, heading towards whatever rendezvous point he'd arranged. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just set something big in motion, something dangerous. But as I thought of that photo, of the fear in that woman's eyes, I knew I'd made the right choice. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of coffee refills and nervous glances at the clock. Every time the door chimed, I half expected to see him walk back in, having realized I'd ratted him out, but he never came back. Instead, as the first light of dawn was breaking, 2 police officers walked in. Their faces were grim as they approached the counter. "Ma'am," one of them said, "well, we're going to need you to come down to the station to make a formal statement." I nodded, untying my apron with shaking hands. Did you find him?" The officers exchanged a look. "We intercepted a vehicle matching the description you gave us," the other one said. "What we found, well, let's just say you potentially saved a life tonight." Relief washed over me, followed quickly by a wave of nausea. It had been real, all of it. As I followed the officers out to their patrol car, I couldn't help but glance back at the diner. For years, it had just been a job, a way to pay the bills. But tonight, it had become something more. A front-row seat to the darker side of humanity, yes, but also a chance to do something that mattered. I climbed into the back of the patrol car, my mind racing. I knew the coming hours would be full of questions, statements, maybe even threats if this guy had connections. But I also knew I'd sleep better tonight knowing I'd done the right thing. As we pulled away from Big Rick's pit stop, I watched the neon sign fade in the rearview mirror. Just another truck stop diner to most people. But to me, it would forever be the place where I learned that sometimes the most important deliveries are the ones we choose to stop. Story 10. The phone screen lit up with another message, casting an eerie glow in the dimly lit restroom. My heart raced as I scrolled through the contents, each image and text more disturbing than the last. What I'd stumbled upon was far beyond anything I'd encountered in my 15 years as a rest area janitor. Little did I know my mundane night shift was about to turn into a nightmare. It all started about an hour ago. I was making my usual rounds, mopping floors and restocking supplies. The rest area was quiet, as it usually is at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. Just a few truckers catching some shut-eye in the parking lot, and the occasional bleary-eyed traveler stumbling in for a coffee refill. I just finished cleaning the men's restroom when I noticed something under one of the sinks. At first, I thought it was trash. People are always leaving stuff behind. But as I bent down to pick it up, I realized it was a smartphone. A nice one, too, probably worth a few $100. Now, I'm not the type to pocket lost items. My mama raised me better than that. So I picked it up, thinking I'd turn it into the lost and found box in the main office. But as I was carrying it out, the screen lit up with a new message. I shouldn't have looked, I know that now. But curiosity got the better of me, and I glanced down at the notification. What I saw made my blood run cold. Target acquired, proceeding with extraction. Below the message was a photo of a young woman, maybe in her early 20s. She looked scared, her eyes wide and pleading. The timestamp on the photo was from just 10 minutes ago. My first instinct was to call the police, but as I fumbled for my own phone, another message came through on the found device. Rendezvous at point B in 30 minutes, prepare for transfer. I felt like I was in way over my head. This wasn't just some lost phone, it was evidence of a crime in progress, a kidnapping by the looks of it, and whoever was behind it might be coming back for their phone at any moment. With shaking hands, I retreated to the janitor's closet, locking the door behind me. I needed time to think, to figure out what to do. I couldn't just hand this over to my supervisor. By the time the proper authorities got involved, it might be too late for that poor girl. I started scrolling through the phone, looking for any information that might help. There were more photos, each one more chilling than the last. Different women, all with the same terrified expressions. Coordinates, dates, amounts of money. This wasn't just one kidnapping, it was an entire operation. As I was absorbed in my horrified scrolling, a sound from outside made me freeze. Footsteps, heavy and purposeful, echoing through the empty rest area. They were getting closer. I held my breath, pressing myself against the door of the closet. The footsteps stopped just outside. I could hear the person's breathing, see the shadow of their feet under the door. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. Then mercifully, the footsteps moved away. I let out a shaky breath, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard through the door. I knew I couldn't stay in this closet forever. Sooner or later, someone was going to come looking for this phone. And when they did, they'd tear this place apart to find it. I needed to act, and fast. With trembling fingers, I unlocked my own phone and dialed 911. But as I raised it to my ear, my heart sank. No signal. Of course, the cinderblock walls of the rest area always played havoc with cell reception. I'd have to go outside to make the call. I cracked open the closet door, peering out into the hallway. It was empty. Gathering my courage, I slipped out, both phones clutched tightly in my hands. I made my way towards the exit, every shadow seeming to hide a potential threat. As I pushed open the door to the parking lot, the cool night air hit me like a slap to the face. I gulped it down gratefully, feeling slightly less panicked in the open space. I raised my phone again, relieved to see bars appearing on the screen. But before I could dial, movement caught my eye. A car had just pulled into the lot, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. As I watched, frozen in place, a man stepped out. He was tall, dressed all in black, with a face that seemed carved from stone. His eyes scanned the area methodically before locking onto me. In that moment, I knew. This was the owner of the phone, and he knew I had it. I didn't think. I just ran. My feet pounded against the asphalt as I sprinted towards my old pickup truck parked on the far side of the lot. Behind me, I could hear the man shouting, his footsteps giving chase. I reached my truck, fumbling with the keys. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. Finally, the door opened and I threw myself inside, slamming it shut just as the man reached the vehicle. He pounded on the window, his face a mask of rage. "Give me the phone," he roared, his voice muffled through the glass. I jammed the key into the ignition, silently praying to whatever higher power might be listening. The engine sputtered once, twice, then roared to life. I threw the truck into reverse, tires squealing as I backed away from the man. He made a grab for the door handle, but I was already moving. I shifted into drive and floored it, the truck lurching forward. In my rearview mirror, I saw the man running back to his car. This wasn't over. As I sped out of the rest area and onto the highway, my mind raced. What was I doing? I was a 58-year-old janitor with a bum knee and high blood pressure. I wasn't cut out for high-speed chases and taking on criminal organizations, but then I thought of those women in the photos, of the terror in their eyes, and I knew I couldn't just walk away. I pressed down harder on the gas pedal, urging my old truck to go faster. In the rearview mirror, I could see headlights gaining on me. The sedan was much faster than my truck, and it was only a matter of time before it caught up. With one hand on the wheel, I managed to dial 911 on my phone. The operator's calm voice was like a lifeline in the chaos. 911, what's your emergency? My name is Frank Holloway, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I'm on Highway 40 heading east from the Pinewood Rest area. I've uncovered evidence of a kidnapping ring, and now they're chasing me. I need help. The operator asked for more details, which I provided as best I could while keeping an eye on the road and the approaching sedan. She assured me that units were being dispatched to my location, but would they get here in time? The sedan was getting closer, its headlights filling my rearview mirror. I could see the silhouette of the driver hunched over the wheel with grim determination. Suddenly, an idea struck me. It was risky, maybe even crazy, but it might be my only chance. Up ahead, I could see the familiar signs for another rest area. If I could just make it there. I took the exit at the last possible moment, the truck swaying dangerously as I swerved. The sedan overshot the exit, buying me a few precious seconds. I sped into the rest area, which was thankfully busier than the last one. I screeched to a halt in front of the main building, leaped out of the truck, and ran inside. There were a few startled travelers inside, nursing cups of vending machine coffee. "Call the police," I shouted, brandishing the phones. I've got evidence of a kidnapping ring." As if on cue, the man from the sedan burst through the doors, his eyes wild with rage, but now he was outnumbered. A couple of truckers moved to block his path, their imposing figures giving him pause. And then, like a miracle, I heard sirens in the distance. The man's face fell as he realized he was trapped. He turned to run, but the truckers were quicker, tackling him to the ground. Minutes later, the rest area was swarming with police. I handed over the phone, my hands shaking as I gave my statement. As the adrenaline wore off, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. An officer approached me, a look of respect in his eyes. "Mr. Holloway," he said, "I don't know if you realize what you've done here tonight. This phone, it's a goldmine of evidence. We've been trying to crack this trafficking ring for months." I nodded, too exhausted to speak. As I watched them lead the man away in handcuffs, I felt a mix of relief and disbelief. Just hours ago, I'd been mopping floors and emptying trash cans. Now I was being hailed as a hero. As the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow over the rest area, I couldn't help but smile. It had been one hell of a night shift, and for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. Who would have thought that a simple act of picking up a lost phone could lead to all this? But that's the thing about life. Sometimes the most extraordinary moments come from the most ordinary beginnings, and sometimes even a tired old janitor can make a difference. As I sat on the curb sipping a cup of truly terrible vending machine coffee and watching the organized chaos around me, I realized something. Tonight hadn't just been about saving those women, as important as that was. It had been about saving a part of myself that I thought was long gone, the part that believed one person could make a difference. I may go back to mopping floors tomorrow, but I'll do it with my head held a little higher, because now I know we all have the potential to be heroes. Sometimes we just need to answer the call when it comes. Story 11. The wail of an 18-wheeler's air horn jolted me awake, my coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim of its paper cup. I blinked hard, forcing my eyes to focus on the endless ribbon of asphalt stretching before us. Sarah stirred in the passenger seat, her face creased with exhaustion. "How long was I out?" she mumbled, straightening up and squinting at the clock on the dashboard. "About an hour," I replied, stifling a yawn. "We should be hitting that rest stop soon. I could use a break." We'd been on the road for nearly 14 hours, pushing through the night in a desperate attempt to make it to Sarah's sister's wedding. A last-minute work emergency had delayed our departure, leaving us no choice but to drive straight through if we had any hope of making it on time. The green highway sign loomed ahead. Rest area 1 mile. I signaled and merged into the exit lane, the prospect of stretching my legs and freshening up giving me a second wind. As I pulled into a parking spot, I noticed how eerily quiet the place was. A few big rigs idled in the truck area, but the car lot was nearly empty. Made sense, I supposed, given that it was just past 3 a.m. "I'm going to use the restroom," Sarah said, already unbuckling her seatbelt. "Can you grab some snacks from the vending machine?" I nodded, fishing some crumpled bills from my pocket as we both stepped out into the chilly pre-dawn air. The fluorescent lights of the rest stop building cast a sickly glow over the deserted picnic area. As Sarah headed for the restrooms, I made my way to the vending machines, my footsteps echoing in the silence. That's when I saw him. A small boy, couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, sitting alone on a bench near the edge of the picnic area. He was staring straight ahead, his legs swinging rhythmically, not quite reaching the ground. I frowned, looking around for any sign of a parent or guardian. The parking lot remained empty, save for our car and the distant semis. "Hey there," I called out softly, not wanting to startle him. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The boy didn't respond. He didn't even seem to register that I'd spoken. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air ran down my spine. I took a few steps closer, my instincts warring between concern for a child alone at night and an inexplicable sense of unease. "Listen, buddy, it's not safe for you to be out here alone. Let's go inside and see if we can find your mom or dad, okay?" As I approached, the boy finally turned to look at me. His eyes, reflecting the harsh fluorescent light, seemed to glow with an unnatural intensity. Without a word, he slid off the bench and bolted towards the tree line that bordered the rest area. "Wait!" I shouted, all thoughts of snacks forgotten as I sprinted after him. "It's not safe!" The boy was faster than I expected, weaving between the trees with a sureness that belied the near-total darkness of the woods. I stumbled after him, branches whipping at my face, the sound of my own ragged breathing drowning out everything else. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a child's laughter, high and clear. It echoed through the trees, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Please," I called out, my voice hoarse, I just want to help you." The laughter came again, closer this time. I spun around trying to pinpoint its source, but the dense foliage played tricks with the sound. That's when I realized I could no longer see the lights of the rest area behind me. Panic began to set in. I fumbled for my phone, cursing as I realized I'd left it in the car. The woods seemed to press in around me, the darkness almost palpable. "Hello!" I shouted, desperation creeping into my voice. "Can anyone hear me?" Only silence answered. I picked a direction at random and started walking, hoping to find my way back to the rest stop. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig under my feet sent my heart racing. How long had I been out here? It felt like hours, but surely it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. The trees began to thin, and for a moment hope surged through me. But as I pushed through the last of the underbrush, my heart sank. Instead of the well-lit rest area, I found myself in a small clearing bathed in pale moonlight. And there, in the center of the clearing, stood the boy. He was facing away from me, perfectly still. As I watched, frozen in place, he slowly turned his head. The face that looked back at me was no longer that of a child. It was ancient, wizened, with eyes that held centuries of malevolent knowledge. I stumbled backward, a scream caught in my throat. My foot caught on a root, and I went down hard, the breath knocked from my lungs. When I managed to look up again, the clearing was empty. Scrambling to my feet, I ran. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life, crashing through the undergrowth with no regard for direction or safety. Branches tore at my clothes, roots seemed to reach up to trip me, but I pushed on, driven by a primal fear I'd never experienced before. Just when I thought my lungs would burst, I saw a glimmer of light ahead. With a final burst of speed, I burst out of the tree line and onto the manicured lawn of the rest area. I collapsed onto the grass, gasping for air, my mind reeling from what I'd just experienced. As my breathing slowed, I became aware of a commotion nearby. "Sir? Sir, are you all right?" I looked up to see a state trooper kneeling beside me, concern etched on his face. Behind him, I could see Sarah, her face pale and tear-streaked, talking animatedly with another officer. I'm okay," I managed to croak out. "There was a boy, in the woods." The trooper's expression shifted slightly. "Sir, we've been searching for you for over an hour. Your wife was frantic. Can you tell me what happened?" "An hour? That couldn't be right. I'd only been gone for a few minutes, hadn't I?" As the trooper helped me to my feet, Sarah rushed over, throwing her arms around me. "Where were you?" she sobbed. "I came out of the bathroom and you were just gone. I thought... I held her tightly, my mind struggling to process everything. Over her shoulder, I could see more police cars pulling into the parking lot, their lights casting eerie red and blue shadows across the picnic area. "Sir," the trooper said, his voice gentle but firm, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Why did you go into the woods?" I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. But as I opened my mouth to speak, movement near the tree line caught my eye. There, just for a moment, I saw a small figure standing in the shadows. A child's face, pale in the darkness, with eyes that glowed like embers. Then it was gone, leaving me to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing. As I turned back to the trooper, ready to try and explain my inexplicable experience, a chill ran down my spine. Because there, on the bench where I'd first seen the boy, sat a small, worn teddy bear. A teddy bear that hadn't been there before. The trooper followed my gaze, his hand instinctively moving to his holster. "What is it?" he asked, tension evident in his voice. I shook my head, unable to find the words. How could I explain what I'd seen, what I'd experienced? Who would believe me? As the first rays of dawn began to pierce the eastern sky, I realized that some questions are better left unanswered. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. And some encounters in the dark of night are best forgotten with the light of day. But as Sarah and I got back into our car, ready to continue our journey, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that the world was not quite as I'd always believed it to be, and that the line between reality and nightmare was far thinner than I'd ever imagined. The rest stop faded in our rearview mirror, taking with it the evidence of my strange adventure. But the memory of those glowing eyes in the darkness, the echo of that unearthly laughter would stay with me forever. A reminder that sometimes the scariest stories are the ones we can never fully explain. Story 12. The ping of a new ride request broke the monotony of my night shift. Little did I know accepting it would plunge me into a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. My name's Alex, and I've been driving for rideshare for about a year now. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and gives me the flexibility to pursue my real passion, writing crime novels. Oh, the irony. It was just past midnight when I pulled up to the address. A dingy apartment complex on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where the American dream goes to die. My passenger, a lanky guy in his 30s with darting eyes and a nervous energy, practically dove into the back seat. "Drive," he said, his voice tight with urgency. I raised an eyebrow, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "Mind if I know where we're going first?" He rattled off an address across town. As I pulled away from the curb, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My passenger kept looking over his shoulder, his leg bouncing up and down like a jackhammer. "Everything okay back there?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. He nodded jerkily. "Yeah, fine, just in a hurry. I've had my share of weird passengers, drunks, cheating spouses, even the occasional celebrity. But this guy, he was giving off vibes that set every alarm bell in my head ringing. We'd gone about 10 blocks when I saw them, the flashing lights in my rearview mirror. 2 police cruisers, sirens blaring, closing in fast. "Shit," my passenger hissed. And then I felt it, the cold press of metal against the back of my neck. "Don't stop. Keep driving." My blood ran cold. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. But the gun digging into my skin told a different story. "Listen, man," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Whatever's going on, we can figure this out. Just put the gun down, okay?" "Shut up and drive, he snapped. "Take the next right, now!" I complied, my hands shaking on the wheel. The cruisers were getting closer, their sirens drowning out the pounding of my heart. My mind raced. Who was this guy? What had he done? And more importantly, how the hell was I going to get out of this alive? "Look," I tried again. "Those cops are going to catch up to us. When they do..." "They won't," he cut me off. "Not if you do exactly what I say. Next left, then into that parking garage." I made the turn, the tires screeching in protest. The parking garage loomed ahead, a concrete monstrosity that promised nothing but dead ends. As we entered the dark maw of the structure, my passenger leaned forward. "Kill the lights. All of them." "Are you crazy?" I protested. "We'll crash." The gun pressed harder against my neck. "Do it. Now." With a silent prayer, I flicked off the headlights. The world plunged into darkness, broken only by the faint glow of dashboard lights and the distant flash of police sirens. "Up! Keep going up!" my passenger directed. I navigated the spiraling ramps by instinct and sheer luck, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Behind us, I could hear the echoing wail of sirens as the police entered the garage. "Stop here!" he suddenly commanded as we reached the top level. Back into that space by the wall. I did as he said, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. We sat there in the darkness, the only sound our ragged breathing and the approaching sirens. "If they find us," he hissed, "you're as good as dead, understand?" I nodded mutely, too terrified to speak. The minutes stretched on, each one feeling like an eternity. I could hear car doors slamming, voices shouting, footsteps echoing through the concrete structure, and then miraculously they began to fade. The sirens resumed, growing distant as the police cars exited the garage. My passenger let out a long, shaky breath. Okay, we're good, let's go." "Go where?" I finally found my voice. "Look, man, I don't know what you've done, but I'm not part of this. Just let me go, okay? I won't say anything, I swear." He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "You really think it's that simple? You're in this now, whether you like it or not. Now drive, and this time, no cops." As we emerged from the parking garage, the city sprawled before us, a maze of neon-lit streets and shadowy alleys. I had no idea where we were going, but I knew one thing. This night was far from over. "Where to?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. "Head towards the docks," he instructed. "And keep your eyes peeled. If you see any cops, any at all, you tell me. Got it?" I nodded, guiding the car through the late-night traffic. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and desperate plans. Could I crash the car, signal for help somehow? Or would any move I made just end with a bullet in my head? As we drove, my passenger's phone buzzed. He answered it, his voice low and tense. "Yeah, I got away. No, had to improvise. Got a ride. Yeah, he's cooperative." My stomach churned at that last word, cooperative, like I had a choice. "Listen," I said as he hung up. "I don't know what's going on, but maybe I can help. I mean, really help. Not just as a getaway driver." He snorted. "You, what could you possibly do to help me?" I took a deep breath. "I'm a writer, crime novels. I research this stuff all the time. Maybe I could help you figure a way out of whatever this is." For a long moment, there was silence from the back seat. Then, "You're shitting me, right? A crime writer?" "It's true," I insisted. "Look, whatever you've done, there's always a way out, always a twist, a loophole. If you tell me what's going on, maybe I can—" "Shut up," he snapped. "Just shut up and drive." But I could hear it in his voice, a hint of uncertainty, a crack in the armor. I pressed on. "Let me guess, you're in trouble, deep trouble. The kind that doesn't just go away by running, am I right?" The gun pressed harder against my neck. I said, "Shut up." Okay. I held up one hand in surrender. "But think about it. What's your plan here? Where are you going to go? You really think you can outrun the cops forever?" He didn't answer, but I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. I decided to push a little further. "Look, I've written about guys in your situation. There's always a way out, but it's never the obvious one, never just running. Maybe I could help you find that way out." For what felt like an eternity, the only sound was the hum of the engine and the distant noise of the city. Then slowly I felt the pressure of the gun ease off my neck. "Talk," he said. "You've got 2 minutes to convince me you can help. After that, well..." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. This was it, my one chance to turn this nightmare around. "Okay, first things first. What exactly are you running from? The more I know, the more I can help." He hesitated, then let out a long sigh. "It's complicated. I was supposed to make a delivery, something big, but it went sideways. Now everyone's after me, the cops, the guys I was working for, probably some other players I don't even know about." My mind whirled. This was like something straight out of one of my novels. "All right," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "So you're caught between a rock and a hard place. The key is to find a third option, something nobody's expecting." "Like what?" he demanded. "Well, that depends. This delivery, was it drugs, money, something else?" "Information," he said after a pause. "Stuff that could bring down some very powerful people." Now we were getting somewhere. "Okay, so you've got leverage. That's good. The question is, how do we use it?" For the next hour, as we drove aimlessly through the city, we talked. I listened as he spilled his story, a tale of corruption, blackmail, and a USB drive that could topple empires. With each revelation, my writer's mind spun, crafting scenarios and possibilities. Gradually, I felt the tension in the car ease. The gun disappeared from view, though I had no doubt it was still within easy reach. We were no longer captor and hostage, but co-conspirators, plotting an escape from an impossible situation. As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, we had a plan. It was risky, audacious, and just crazy enough to work. The kind of twist ending that would make readers gasp. "You really think this will work?" he asked as we pulled into an all-night diner. I shrugged. "In my books? Definitely. In real life? I guess we're about to find out." As we sat in a booth, nursing cups of mediocre coffee and finalizing our plan, I couldn't help but marvel at the absurdity of it all. I'd started the night as a simple rideshare driver and was ending it as the architect of a scheme to outmaneuver both the mob and the police. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. My next novel was practically writing itself. Story 13. The fog rolled in thick and fast, blanketing the mountain road in an impenetrable white shroud. I squinted through the windshield, my knuckles white on the steering wheel of my tow truck. The call had come in just as I was about to clock out for the night, a stranded vehicle on Shadow Peak Road about halfway up the mountain. Little did I know this routine call would lead me into a night of terror and mystery that would haunt me for years to come. My name's Mike Callahan, and I've been running Callahan's Towing for the better part of 2 decades. In all my years on the job, I've seen my fair share of weird stuff cars wrapped around trees in impossible ways, vehicles in places they had no business being, and drivers with stories that would make your hair stand on end. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to encounter on that foggy night. The road twisted and turned, each bend revealing nothing but more mist. My headlights barely penetrated the gloom, and I found myself leaning forward, straining to see any sign of the stranded vehicle. The radio crackled with static, the mountain interfering with the signal. I was well and truly on my own up here. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, I saw it. A pair of taillights glowing faintly in the fog. I pulled up behind the vehicle, a late-model sedan that looked like it had seen better days. The engine was still running, which struck me as odd. Usually, folks turn off their cars to save gas while waiting for help. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the truck, the cold mountain air biting at my skin. "Hello?" I called out, my voice seeming to be swallowed by the fog. "Anyone here? Callahan's Towing." No response. I approached the car cautiously, my boots crunching on the gravel shoulder. As I got closer, I realized something wasn't right. The driver's side door was wide open, swinging gently in the breeze. My heart rate picked up a notch. In all my years of doing this job, I'd never come across an abandoned vehicle with the engine still running. Something must have spooked the driver pretty bad for them to just up and leave like that. I shone my flashlight into the car's interior. Everything looked normal. No signs of a struggle or anything out of place. The keys were still in the ignition, and a half-empty coffee cup sat in the cup holder, still steaming. Whoever had been driving this car hadn't been gone for long. That's when I heard it. A faint cry coming from the woods on the other side of the road. It sounded like someone calling for help, their voice weak and distant. "Hello?" I called out again, louder this time. "Is someone there? Do you need help?" The cry came again, a little clearer this time. It was definitely a human voice, and they sounded scared. I hesitated, looking back at my tow truck. The smart thing would be to call this in, wait for backup. But what if someone was hurt out there? Every minute could count. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. I grabbed the emergency kit from my truck, made sure my cell phone was in my pocket, and headed towards the tree line, my flashlight cutting a feeble path through the fog and darkness. The underbrush was thick, branches snagging at my clothes as I pushed deeper into the woods. The fog seemed to get even thicker here, if that was possible. I could barely see a few feet in front of me. "Hello," I called out again. "Where are you?" The voice came again, seeming to move further away. I pressed on, my heart pounding in my chest. Something about this whole situation felt wrong. But I couldn't just leave someone out here alone and possibly hurt. I'm not sure how long I walked. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the fog-shrouded forest. My flashlight beam caught glimpses of twisted tree trunks and gnarled roots, creating sinister shapes in the gloom. More than once, I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. Suddenly, my foot caught on something and I went sprawling. I hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of me. As I pushed myself up, my hand brushed against something cold and metallic. I directed my flashlight at the object and my blood ran cold. It was a necklace, a delicate silver chain with a small heart-shaped locket, and it was covered in what looked horribly like dried blood. I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing. This was bad. This was very, very bad. I needed to get out of here, call the police, let them handle this. But as I turned to head back the way I came, I realized with growing horror that I had no idea which direction I'd come from. The fog had completely disoriented me. That's when I heard the voice again, much closer this time. But now, instead of a cry for help, it sounded like laughter? A cold, mirthless chuckle that sent shivers down my spine. I spun around, my flashlight beam darting from tree to tree. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "Show yourself!" The laughter grew louder, seeming to come from all around me. And then, through the fog, I saw a figure emerge. It was tall and gaunt, dressed in tattered clothes that looked like they belonged to another century. But it was the face that made my heart nearly stop. Pale as death, with eyes that glowed an unnatural red in the darkness. I stumbled backward, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of sick joke or hallucination. The figure took a step towards me, its mouth stretching into an impossibly wide grin that revealed rows of sharp, pointed teeth. "Welcome, Mike Callahan," it said in a voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. "We've been waiting for you." I turned and ran, blind panic driving me forward. Branches whipped at my face, roots seemed to reach up to trip me, but I kept going. Behind me I could hear that terrible laughter growing louder and closer with each passing second. I burst out of the tree line, nearly falling as I hit the asphalt of the road. My tow truck was there, right where I'd left it. I sprinted towards it, fumbling for my keys. As I reached for the door handle, a cold hand clamped down on my shoulder. I spun around, coming face to face with the nightmarish figure from the woods. Up close I could see that its skin wasn't just pale, it was translucent, with dark veins visible beneath the surface. "You can't leave yet, Mike," it hissed, its breath smelling of decay. "The fun's just beginning." In that moment, something inside me snapped. All the fear, all the confusion, it all turned into a white-hot rage. Without thinking, I swung my flashlight as hard as I could, connecting solidly with the thing's head. It let out an inhuman shriek and stumbled backward. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I yanked open the truck door, threw myself inside, and cranked the engine. The tires squealed as I floored it, the truck fishtailing on the wet road before straightening out. I drove like a man possessed, taking the twisting mountain road at speeds that would have been dangerous even in clear conditions. But I didn't care. All I wanted was to put as much distance between myself and whatever the hell I'd encountered back there. It wasn't until I reached the bottom of the mountain that I finally slowed down, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold onto the steering wheel. I pulled over to the side of the road and sat there for a long time trying to make sense of what had happened. Had it all been real? Or had I somehow hallucinated the whole thing? The rational part of my brain wanted to dismiss it as some kind of stress-induced delusion, but I could still feel the weight of that blood-stained necklace in my pocket, a tangible reminder that something very real and very wrong had happened up on that mountain. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually I gathered myself enough to drive to the police station. I told them everything about the abandoned car, the voice in the woods, the necklace, and yes, even the impossible creature I'd encountered. To their credit, they took my statement seriously, especially when I produced the necklace as evidence. In the days that followed, a search was conducted of the area. They found the abandoned car just as I'd described it. But of the driver, or the monstrous figure I'd encountered, there was no sign. The fog had lifted, revealing nothing but ordinary woods. The necklace turned out to belong to a woman who had gone missing in the area several months earlier. Her case remains unsolved. As for me, I still run my towing business, but I don't take calls on Shadow Peak Road anymore, especially not at night. Some places, I've learned, are best left alone, and some mysteries are better left unsolved. But on foggy nights, when the mist rolls in thick and heavy, I can't help but wonder about what's really out there in the darkness. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I hear a faint, chilling laughter carried on the wind. Story 14. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It hit me like a wall the moment I pushed open the restroom door. a nauseating mix of industrial cleaner and something metallic, coppery, something that made my stomach churn. I've been working the night shift at the Lone Star truck stop for going on 5 years now, and I've seen my fair share of nasty bathrooms. But this was different. My name's Jake, and I'm the guy who makes sure this place doesn't fall apart between midnight and 8 a.m. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills and keeps me out of trouble. At least that's what I thought until that night. It was a Tuesday just after 2 a.m. The usual crowd of long-haul truckers had thinned out, leaving just a handful of regulars nursing coffee at the counter. I was making my rounds, restocking the snack aisle when I noticed him. He was a big guy, easily clearing 6.5 feet, with shoulders like a linebacker. But it wasn't his size that caught my attention. It was the way he moved, all twitchy and nervous, his eyes darting around like he expected someone to jump out at him at any moment. I've seen plenty of guys strung out on uppers trying to push through another 100 miles before crashing. But this was different. This guy was scared. He made a beeline for the restroom, and something in my gut told me to follow. I gave him a minute, then made my way over, push broom in hand as a flimsy excuse. That's when I opened the door and that smell hit me. "Everything all right in here?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a shuffling sound from the far stall, then the click of a lock. The door swung open, and there he was, the big guy, looking even more rattled than before. "Yeah, fine," he grunted, shouldering past me to the sink. I couldn't help but notice he was favoring his right hand, keeping it tucked close to his body. As he washed up, I made a show of sweeping, all the while keeping an eye on him in the mirror. That's when I saw it. A flash of red swirling down the drain. My heart started pounding. Blood, it had to be blood. The guy caught me looking, and our eyes met in the mirror. For a second, I thought he might take a swing at me, but then his shoulders slumped and he just looked defeated. "You got a first aid kit around here?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, trying to keep my cool. "Yeah, behind the counter. Come on, I'll get it for you." As we walked back into the store, I could feel the eyes of the few remaining customers on us. I ducked behind the counter, fumbling for the first aid kit we kept for minor emergencies. "Here," I said, sliding it across to him. "You want me to call someone? A doctor, maybe?" He shook his head vehemently. No doctors. I need to clean this up and get back on the road." I watched as he opened the kit, his hands shaking as he pulled out gauze and antiseptic. That's when I got a good look at his injury, a deep gash across his palm, still oozing blood. "Jesus, man," I couldn't help but exclaim. "What happened?" He froze, his eyes locking onto mine. For a moment I thought he might bolt, but then he seemed to deflate, sinking onto one of the counter stools. "I messed up," he said, his voice so low I had to lean in to hear him. "I messed up bad, and now they're after me." A chill ran down my spine. "Who's after you?" He shook his head. "You don't want to know. The less you know, the safer you are. I need to get cleaned up and get out of here. Can you help me with this?" He gestured to his injured hand. I'm not sure why I agreed. Maybe it was the desperation in his eyes, or maybe it was just morbid curiosity. But the next thing I knew, I was wrapping his hand in gauze, trying not to think about what he might have done to end up in this state. As I worked, he kept glancing at the door, his whole body tense like a coiled spring. "You got a back way out of here?" he asked. I hesitated. Every instinct was screaming at me to call the cops, to not get involved, but something held me back. "Yeah, through the kitchen, but listen, man, whatever you're mixed up in..." He cut me off. Just don't. You seem like a good guy. I don't want to drag you into this. Just point me to the exit and forget you ever saw me, all right?" I nodded, swallowing hard. "Through there," I said, pointing to the swinging doors that led to the kitchen. "Past the walk-in, there's a fire exit. It'll set off an alarm, but it'll give you a few minutes head start." He stood up, towering over me. For a second, I thought he might say something else, but he just nodded, his eyes full of a mixture of gratitude and regret. Then he was gone, disappearing through the kitchen doors. I stood there for a moment, my heart racing. What had I just done? What if he was a murderer, or worse? Should I call the cops? Before I could decide, the bell over the door chimed. 2 men walked in, their eyes scanning the nearly empty store. They were dressed casually, but something about the way they carried themselves screamed, "Law enforcement." "Evening," one of them said, flashing a badge so quickly I couldn't make out the agency. "We're looking for a man. Might have come through here in the last hour or so. Big guy, probably looking pretty nervous. You seen anyone like that?" I felt the blood drain from my face. This was it. This was my chance to do the right thing, to tell them everything. But then I remembered the fear in the big guy's eyes, the desperation in his voice, and something else. The way these men moved, the hardness in their eyes. They didn't feel like cops, not really. In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. "Sorry," I heard myself say. "It's been pretty quiet tonight, just the usual truckers passing through." The man's eyes narrowed, studying my face. I forced myself to meet his gaze, praying he couldn't hear the pounding of my heart. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded. "All right. If you see anything suspicious, you give us a call, yeah?" He slid a business card across the counter. I picked it up, noticing there was no agency listed, just a name and number. "Sure thing," I managed to say. They left as quickly as they'd come, the bell chiming in their wake. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, my legs suddenly feeling weak. What had I just gotten myself into? I made my way back to the restroom, my mind racing. I needed to clean up whatever mess was left behind, to erase any trace of what had happened here tonight. As I pushed open the door, that smell hit me again, blood and fear and secrets. I stood there for a moment, the harsh fluorescent lights flickering overhead, and realized that my quiet, predictable life had just taken a sharp turn into unknown territory. Whatever that big guy was mixed up in, I was now a part of it too. I had chosen a side in a game I didn't understand, with players I couldn't identify and stakes I couldn't imagine. As I started to clean, scrubbing away the evidence of this strange encounter, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. That somehow, in the space of one ordinary night shift, I had stumbled into something much bigger and more dangerous than I could have ever anticipated. The Lone Star truck stop had always been a waypoint, a place for travelers to rest and refuel before continuing their journeys. But now it felt like something else entirely, a crossroads where paths converged and destinies were altered. And me? I was no longer just Jake, the night shift guy. I was a keeper of secrets, a reluctant accomplice in a mystery I couldn't begin to unravel. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky outside, I finished my cleanup. The restroom looked normal now, no trace of the drama that had unfolded here, but I knew that nothing would ever be truly normal again. I pocketed the business card the men had left, a tangible reminder of the choice I'd made. And as I waited for my shift to end, I found myself watching the door, wondering who else might walk in. What other secrets might find their way to this unremarkable truck stop in the middle of nowhere? One thing was certain. My quiet nights were a thing of the past, and whatever came next, I had a feeling it was going to be one hell of a ride. Story 15. The stench hit me first, a putrid cocktail of rot and despair. Then came the muffled scream that would haunt my dreams for years to come. My name's Jake, and I've been a garbage collector in this city for nearly a decade. Night shift, of course. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills and keeps me out of trouble. At least that's what I thought until that fateful night. It was a Tuesday, just past 2 a.m., the kind of summer night where the air hangs heavy, thick with humidity and the lingering heat of the day. I was making my usual rounds in the industrial district, a maze of warehouses and forgotten alleys where the city's secrets go to die. I just finished emptying a dumpster behind some nondescript warehouse when I heard it. A sound so faint, so out of place that at first I thought I'd imagined it. But then it came again, a muffled cry, barely audible over the rumble of my truck's engine. My first instinct was to ignore it. In this job, you learn pretty quick that some things are better left undiscovered. But something, call it conscience, call it curiosity, made me pause. I killed the engine and climbed down from the cab, my boots crunching on broken glass and gravel. The alley was dark, the only illumination coming from a flickering streetlight at the far end. "Hello?" I called out, feeling like an idiot. "Anyone there?" Silence. Then, just as I was about to chalk it up to an overactive imagination, I heard it again. A whimper followed by a dull thud, and it was coming from the dumpster I'd just emptied. My heart began to race as I approached the metal container. 1,000 scenarios flashed through my mind, each more horrifying than the last. Was it an animal, A kid playing a prank or something far worse? With shaking hands, I lifted the lid. The stench that billowed out nearly knocked me off my feet, a nauseating mix of rotten food, stale beer, and something metallic that made my stomach churn. And there, amidst the garbage and filth, was a pair of eyes staring back at me, human eyes wide with terror. Jesus Christ, I muttered, my voice barely a whisper. The eyes belonged to a woman. She was bound and gagged, her clothes torn and stained. How long had she been in there? Hours? Days? I reached in to pull her out, my mind reeling. Who would do something like this? And more importantly, what the hell was I supposed to do now? As I helped her over the edge of the dumpster, a sound froze the blood in my veins. Footsteps. Heavy and purposeful, echoing off the alley walls. The woman's eyes widened in panic. She tried to speak through her gag, shaking her head frantically. I didn't need a translator to understand. Whoever had put her in that dumpster was coming back. In that moment, time seemed to stretch. I had a choice to make, and fast. I could run, jump in my truck and peel out of there, pretend I'd never seen anything. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But as I looked into those terrified eyes, I knew I couldn't leave her. Not like this. It's okay, I whispered, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. I'm going to get you out of here. The footsteps were getting closer. I could see a shadow stretching along the alley wall, growing larger with each passing second. With strength I didn't know I possessed, I scooped the woman up and sprinted for my truck. My lungs burned, my muscles screamed in protest, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I yanked open the passenger door and practically threw the woman inside, then scrambled around to the driver's side. As I fumbled with the keys, a figure emerged at the end of the alley. Even in the dim light, I could see the glint of metal in his hand. The engine roared to life just as the first gunshot rang out. The windshield exploded in a shower of glass, and I instinctively ducked. I slammed the truck into gear and floored it. The tires squealed as we shot forward, sideswiping a row of trash cans. In the rearview mirror, I could see the man running after us, but he was quickly swallowed by the darkness. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Beside me, the woman was making muffled noises through her gag, her eyes wild with a mix of fear and desperate hope. It's okay, I said, trying to sound calm despite the tremor in my voice. We're gonna be all right. I'm taking you to the police station. As we sped through the empty streets, my mind raced. What had I just gotten myself into? Who was this woman? And who was the man back in the alley? I glanced over at my passenger. In the harsh glow of passing streetlights, I could see the bruises on her face, the raw marks on her wrists where the ropes had cut into her skin. Whatever her story was, it wasn't pretty. I'm going to take this gag off, okay? I said as we stopped at a red light. My hands shook as I worked at the knot. But you got to promise me you won't scream or anything. We don't want to attract attention. She nodded frantically. As the gag came loose, she gasped for air, coughing and sputtering. Thank you, she finally managed, her voice hoarse. Oh, God, thank you. What's your name? I asked, my eyes darting between her and the road. Sarah, she said. I didn't think anyone would find me. I thought I was going to die in that dumpster. The light turned green and I accelerated, perhaps a bit too quickly. What happened to you, Sarah? Who was that guy back there? She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. It's complicated. I saw something I shouldn't have, something big. They tried to shut me up, but I got away. At least I thought I did. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. There's more than one, huh? Sarah nodded grimly. It goes deep. Cops, politicians, businessmen, they're all in on it. Great, just great. I'd stumbled into some kind of massive conspiracy. This was way above my pay grade. We need to get you to the police, I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. No. Sarah's hand shot out, gripping my arm with surprising strength. We can't trust them. Didn't you hear what I said? They're involved. I opened my mouth to argue, but the words died in my throat. If what she was saying was true, the police station might be the last place we should go. Okay, I said, my mind racing. Okay, let's think this through. We need somewhere safe, somewhere they won't look for you. As we drove aimlessly through the city, Sarah filled me in on the details. It was a sordid tale of corruption, human trafficking, and money laundering that went all the way to the mayor's office. She had evidence documents and recordings that could bring the whole operation crashing down. It's in a safety deposit box, she explained. That's why they couldn't kill me outright. They need me to access it. I nodded, trying to process it all. So what's the plan? We can't just keep driving around forever. Sarah was quiet for a moment, her brow furrowed in thought. I have a friend, she said finally. Someone I trust. She might be able to help us. As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, we pulled up in front of a modest house in the suburbs. Sarah's friend, a no-nonsense woman named Angela, took one look at us and ushered us inside without a word. Over strong coffee and hushed conversations, a plan began to take shape. It was risky, borderline insane, but it was the best shot we had. 12 hours later, I found myself standing in front of the mayor's office, my heart pounding in my chest. In my hand was a USB drive containing copies of Sarah's evidence. Beside me, Sarah stood tall, her face set with determination. As we walked into the building, I couldn't help but marvel at the absurdity of it all. 24 hours ago, I was just a garbage man, invisible to the world. Now I was about to help expose a criminal empire. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. My life would never be the same. And as we stepped into the elevator that would take us to the mayor's office, I realized I was okay with that. After all, sometimes the most valuable things are found in the trash. And sometimes it takes a garbage man to clean up the real filth in this city.